Before we get started, anybody got any issues or problems or discussions you want to throw out there just for us to kill a few minutes here while we wait for people to log on? I see several of you that I know, and I know a lot of you are new folks that I'm not familiar with. So look forward to kind of introducing you guys to what I do and a little bit of that. But more importantly, today, you know, I've probably over the years done roughly 100 to 120 one-on-one role plays with people on their presentation, and what I've always found is that it's the same mistakes and shortcomings that keep showing up over and over and over again that get you right there. We've all been in that situation hundreds of times where the client, you're absolutely convinced that they're about to pull out their credit card, and then at the last second, things just go awry. And so today we're going to identify some things that you may be doing that are causing that. One of the interesting things that I see over and over again, a lot of times we fall victim to thinking that the sale didn't happen because of something we didn't say. And ironically, much more often it's because of something we did say. And so we're going to identify some of those things that are creeping into your presentation today. Like I said, we'll give it a couple more minutes. I know the BBMers are wrapping up their call right now and be here shortly. This is not for any one magazine company. This is, we're going to be talking from a perspective of all magazines. Because as those of you who know me know, I am an absolute believer in terms of what the local neighborhood community magazine is capable of doing for the businesses in that community. And we're going to talk about that a little bit here in a second as well.
Hey, John, one of the things that, my biggest obstacle is people keeping appointments. So that's another thing totally. They're just ghost you, they're trying to reschedule and stuff like that. One of the things I think some people with the current economy or with everything going on in the world is they're afraid of commitment.
Absolutely.
Long-term commitment. 12 months is our minimum. People won't even, I don't know. That's one of the things that I find difficult.
Yeah, and you raised a couple of questions right there that are actually two very big issues in today's world. The whole no-show thing. Let's kind of talk about it first. No-shows, I won't say they didn't exist pre-COVID, but they were much less common. They were much less common. And then COVID kind of changed that in some perspective, and I'm not really sure how. Ever since COVID, we've seen like a 20 to 30% no-show rate for people, and the way to combat that, and I'll kind of touch on this real quickly, while we're waiting. The way to combat that is the first thing you need to have a very, very strong social presence because what happens is, and we all do it, we all know that as soon as we schedule an appointment with somebody, we go look them up. We go try to find them to see as much information as we possibly can about the person we're going to meet with. They do the exact same thing with you. And so what they have to see when they go looking for you is somebody that they believe can help solve their problem. If your profile doesn't scream, I can help solve a problem that you have, you're going to have a lot of no-shows. Because that's that, we use like LinkedIn primarily in the business world as validating your existence, and second, validating whether or not you're a business that I can actually benefit from. And so that's one of the first things that leads to high no-shows. If I see somebody that's got a really high no-show rate, I know their social profile doesn't scream, I can help you. So that's the first.
I don't know if that's the case on my part, but
Okay, may not be.
because I have a great social presence,
Okay.
and the some of the things is when I'm having appointment setters, which is ending this month, set my appointments, and a lot of times people don't even know what it's about. They don't know who I am or any of that. So I
And
don't
that's
think
what
they're looking me up on social media
yeah.
because I
Well,
don't think they don't even know what the meeting's about.
or yeah, they may not get to that stage. I know that's one of the problem with appointment setters and why they're a mixed bag in terms of it's great to have those appointments on your schedule, but we all know that if the appointment isn't set up right, and if that person doesn't know why you're meeting and what you can do for them and everything else, then we all do it. It's interesting right now, and that's not to focus on this thing. But I do a separate webinar where I talk with people. Um, Everyone is more overwhelmed right now than they've been at any point in history. The world is going to change more in this next hour than it did in the entire 1840s. So there's so much new information and so much mind-blowing stuff to process that everybody walks away in almost a near state of overwhelm. And what it does is it causes us to shut down. It causes us, not to make calls, or it causes us not to show up for appointments and all that because we're just simply overwhelmed. So one of the things that I really work with people on is to help them understand how to communicate with a client in a way that doesn't overwhelm that client. Because the moment somebody starts to feel overwhelmed, our natural reaction is to resort to fear, because for most of human existence that's how we made all of our decisions, and so we default to that when we feel overwhelmed. So you always want to kind of think in terms of that, and that same thing applies to what you said about people wanting shorter term contracts. I mean, basically, because they are afraid of commitment, especially if it involves something they don't understand. And let's be honest, most of the businesses that we meet with have no clue what marketing and advertising is all about. And so if they don't understand it, then that fires up those fear mechanisms. And one of the things that we work on is helping people navigate that. It's funny, and I'm going to talk about this in just a second. I'd say we're probably almost ready to start here. May have a few latecomers, but one of the things that most people don't recognize is the close has to be approached from an entirely different perspective than the rest of the presentation. The presentation itself is about getting the client excited about being a part of your magazine. And most of the time, we do a really good job with that. The magazine itself does a lot of the work on that. But people get excited about it. Where the mistake comes is shifting to the close. The close isn't about selling the product anymore. The close is about making that client feel comfortable making a decision, and that's where most of us lose it. It's you have to focus the entire close on simplifying the decision and making them feel comfortable making it. And oftentimes we muddy that water instead of clear it up during the close, and that's really what we're going to focus on entirely. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you all for being here today. I know a lot of you, and then some of you I don't know. So those of you who I don't know, I look forward to kind of introducing myself and letting you know what I do. I was a publisher for BVM for 10 years. I was a division leader for 9. And one of the things that I realized early on, there's actually 2 things that I realized early on, is that I have a passion for helping local businesses. Most of them are really, really struggling in today's world. Ironically, as I mentioned just a second ago, much of it has to do with they're just overwhelmed. Most of the businesses we meet with are very good at what they do and very, very bad at running a business doing it. So one of the things I'm doing since I left BVM is I'm building some products and some services to actually help business owners better run their business. And one of the reasons why I continue to work with publishers is twofold. I enjoy the industry. I do think the magazines are one of the best tools, or not, let me rephrase that. I do think the magazines are the best tool for helping local businesses. But also, if I can help publishers get better at helping and connecting with their customers, it gives me a second level way of helping business owners. Because I think every time you guys walk into an appointment, you have the potential to reshape the future of that business. And one of the things that comes in is really owning that responsibility. And before I go down, I want to kind of share a little bit about my personal history. When I was in high school, my parents quit their jobs and started a travel agency. They'd always loved travel and they wanted their own business, so they started a travel agency. They were in that field for about a year, and they were struggling. They were working 80-hour weeks and barely paying the bills. And they went to a conference, and at this conference, they ended up at the bar, which is where most of the education takes place at conferences. They ended up sitting next to a very successful travel agent, and he was bragging about all these real high dollar travel experiences he'd sold, cruises around the world, that kind of thing. And my dad finally had enough beer in him to ask, hey, how do you do that? All we sell are these, airline tickets, which we make $2 a piece on. If you guys remember, in those days, there were these great big printers that printed off tangible tickets that you had to have. And these $199 3-day Bahama cruises. And the guy says, well, what do you advertise? And they said, well, we advertise, these cruises and airline tickets because that's all anybody wants. And he said, you're missing the point. In your neighborhood, there's people spending $10,000 to $15,000 on vacation every summer. They just don't spend it with you because they think all you offer is the cheap stuff. People are going to buy what you advertise. So my mom and dad came back, restructured the business, started selling bucket list tours and vacations. And then the next thing they knew, they're working 40 hours a week. They're making 10 times as much money with a fraction of the customers. The internet hits and all those folks selling cheap cruises and airline tickets disappeared and their business continued strong. And I look at that and realize that my life pivoted on a 5-minute conversation with a stranger in a bar about marketing. And the way I want you guys to think of this and the way to be truly successful as a magazine publisher is to recognize that every time you're sitting in front of a client, you have the potential to be that 5-minute conversation that determines whether that business owner's kids go to college or whether you see him as a Walmart greeter 6 months from now. And that's a very powerful thing when you own it. Now, we'll talk about that more later. They were talking about closing. But those are, if you start approaching what you do from that sort of perspective and realizing the power you have to reshape these businesses you're in front of, it changes everything. Now, going to this, the first thing that's essential here is we look. Neighborhood magazines, as I've touched on, are the best tool for helping small local businesses. Now, I fully understand they don't get that because they don't understand advertising and marketing. So that becomes the first thing you have to know. You have to believe that. And I know sometimes it's hard to believe that because you have people who know absolutely nothing about advertising and marketing telling you things like print is dead and advertising doesn't work and all of those things. And it's very easy to fall into the trap of believing that, especially if you haven't closed any sales in a while. So the first thing I want to do before we get into the 5 mistakes is shore up your core conviction in why your magazine is not just a good tool, but it is the best tool for. Now, let's look at why that is. First thing is, high-end homeowners generate most of the profit in any community. Most business owners fall into the trap of believing all customers are created equal. And most marketing targets all customers the same. But the reality is that most businesses fall under the Pareto principle, where 80% of their profit is generated by 20% of their customers. And in every market out there, the high-end homeowner generates that 20% that generates all their profit. So the customers you're reaching are the ones that generate profit and not just more work and more overhead. And that is an essential understanding you need to remember. The second thing you need to know is these profitable customers, they don't make decisions based on price. That's what makes them profitable. They make decisions looking for value, quality, and community connections and emotional connections. That's how they decide who they're going to use. If I live in a $1 million home and my roof starts to leak, and I go out and hire the cheapest roofer I can find to put the cheapest roof he has on my house, my $1 million home is now worth $925,000 because it has a shitty roof on it. And you have to recognize that's what changes the economy of these customers. And finally, your magazine taps into how they make decisions. It's amazing. If you were to go back in your community and you were to find a 10-year-old coupon clipper, probably even a 5-year-old coupon clipper or money saver or door hanger or something of that nature, what you would find is nearly every one of those businesses are gone because they built their marketing strategy around price-driven customers that produce more work and overhead than they do profit. You all offer the opposite. You target the customers that generate profit, and you do it in a way that taps into how they make decisions. And that is incredibly powerful and something you guys need to own. And like I said, it's amazing how often, and when we see it with business owners as well, how many times have you guys done a presentation with a business owner that is absolutely excited and giddy about the chance of being in your magazine, and you talk to them 3 days later, and they had a conversation with cousin Ed, who dropped out of school in 3rd grade, who's never done anything but makeshift work, who told them the magazine was a bad idea, and they talk themselves out of it. That happens all the time, but you guys do it too. You guys will listen to a plumber that may be the greatest plumber that ever held a wrench, who doesn't know anything about advertising and marketing, and he will say, "Oh, this advertising stuff doesn't work for me. Magazines, print's dead. That's silly. That's crap." And you will walk there feeling less about your product than you did before. So I want to first shore up your confidence in what you're bringing to the table, because it is the best tool for these businesses, because it targets on the customers that will actually keep them in business instead of create so much overhead they can't stay afloat. Now, that's the first thing. So now we want to move on. With all of that, because you are the best, why is it so hard to sell? Why do you struggle? Why doesn't every person you present to automatically buy? And the first thing is, in order to understand how valuable your magazine is, the customer has to understand some basic laws of marketing and business, and very few customers do. That's just the reality. The second is, most competition focuses on more is better. And this is something you guys really have to understand. If I'm a local business owner and I have 10 advertising reps come by my office in a week, 9 of the 10 will try to sell me on how many people they can reach, because their tools reach every customer equally. They either focus on 100% of the audience as collective, or they focus specifically on the 80% that are price driven, that aren't good customers to have. More is better. So if a radio guy walks in and says, "Hey, for $1,000, I can reach 100,000 people," and another radio guy walks in and says, "Hey, for $1,000, I can reach 30,000 people," it is a no-brainer which one's the best buy, the one that reaches the most people. That's the way every other advertising tool is sold. You guys are different. You walk in the door and say, "Hey, for that $1,000, I can reach 2,000 people." Well, obviously, if they don't understand the power of targeting and the difference between your customers and everybody else's customers, that seems like a fool's decision. And you have to be able to educate them otherwise. And because of this difference, most of you who have sales backgrounds come from worlds all about building relationships, and you try to slow sell them. You get in, you talk about the kids. "Oh, yeah, I love golf too. Did you watch PGA this weekend?" and all that crap. Because that's the way traditional sales works. Because for traditional sales, while the emotion of the moment may be lost as time passes, the core decision-making elements aren't. Those two radio stations I mentioned, that cost per thousand basis that I'm going to use to make my decision is going to be the same today as it is next Friday, as it is a month from now, as it is 3 months from now. It's always going to be, for one person I can get 100,000, the other I can get 30,000. The moment I decide to spend $1,000, I know who I'm going with. That doesn't apply to you because it requires an understanding that they only have right after your presentation. By the next morning, they've started to forget everything you said, which justified them spending $1,000 on your select group of homes. And so the longer that sale draws out, the chances of you closing it drop. A week later, here's what they remember. They remember, "Yeah, John had a magazine that I kind of liked." That's never going to be enough to overcome the price objection. Remember, all sales boil down to one simple equation. If the value they think they're getting is higher than the price you're asking them to pay, they buy. If it's not, they don't. When you do your presentation, because of the education required, that is the highest point of understanding of the value they will ever have. The moment you walk out the door, that perceived value starts to drop because they forget what you told them. And that's why the slow sales process does not work with your product, because it requires a much higher level of understanding to say yes. Now, let's move into the close. The first, and this is not one of the top 5 mistakes, this is just something that often gets lost in the process. So before we can really get into the close, we need to set the close up properly. So to set the close up properly, you have to do several things. The first is you have to make sure you're talking to someone who can say yes. If you're not, if you do 1,000 appointments in your neighborhoods, and all 1,000 appointments are with a janitor, you will close no sales. And yet you'll feel like crap. You'll feel like you must be the worst salesperson in the world because you did 1,000 presentations and didn't close any. But really and truly, you didn't do any, because if the person can't say yes, you're just practicing. Now, I do recognize that in a larger business, there is a level of hierarchy you have to go through to get to a decision maker. I understand that. I'm not ignoring that. I'm not saying you're always going to be in front of the decision maker. but you have to make sure the person you're presenting to is at least in a position to say yes at advancing the sale in those situations. However, in many smaller businesses, we often settle for meeting with people that aren't in the decision making because it allows us to fill our calendar and say, I did this many presentations this week. But the reality of it is, if you're not in front of somebody who can say yes to either buying or in a very large organization, say yes to moving you up the food chain to someone else, then you're not in a position to close a sale anyway, and you shouldn't judge yourself based on it. You also need to let them know at the very beginning that you intend to sell them something before you leave. One of the things I see over and over and over again with publishers is they treat the presentation as just a conversation that may or may not lead to an opportunity to buy. You can't do that. People have to know. When I was in public speaking, one of the rules of public speaking is you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them that, you go over it again, and then at the end you take an action. Okay, so at the very beginning, and here's the way I always like to do it, and to me this worked very well. It says, hey, I tell you, I think I've got something here that is absolutely going to help solve your problem reaching people and put you in front of the profitable customers that you need to grow your business like you want to. I think it's a great fit, but ultimately you'll need to decide that. At the end, I'm going to ask you to come on board with a partner with me. Does that sound like a plan? And what did I do? I gave them power by telling them it's ultimately your decision, so they know I'm not trying to force anything on them. But I did let them know that I'm going to ask for a sale at the end of this. And so that's important. And going from there and building on that and moving forward, you have to let them know that you're going to ask for a sale. The other thing that does for you who may not have been in sales very long and may not have quite the experience closing deals as you'd like to have, that also puts you on the hook for asking for the sale at the end, because you already told them you were going to, and so now you're obligated to. Because what happens a lot is we don't do that when we get to the end, and we'll talk about that more in just a second. And I empowered them, simply giving them the power to say, hey, for the next 15 or 20 minutes, I'm going to tell you what we do. You don't have to worry about anything other than just listening, because at the end, I'm going to ask you to come on board as a partner. So it really kind of turns it over to them. So now they're actually listening to your presentation in a way that they know they're going to be asked for the sale, and they're saying, hey, am I going to go and be a part of this? Am I going to buy? It changes the way they listen to everything else you do. Next, I want to understand the difference between the presentation and the close. Most people really, really do their entire presentation, and this is a little confusing because when I say the presentation, I mean the time you're sitting in front of the client. But in this case, the presentation is up to the point where you've convinced them that it would be a good move for them to be in the magazine. And the presentation needs to be very high energy. One of the things that you have to understand, most of the business owners that you're dealing with understand at some level that they don't understand business. They know they have weak spots when it comes to marketing and advertising. They don't have confidence in those areas. And one of the things that you have to give them is you have to give them enough confidence and energy so that they can borrow some. Because if you are so confident in your ability to help their product, that makes them more confident because they believe you. So the presentation is all about high energy. It needs to be informative. It needs to do two things. It needs to tell them not only what your product does, but it needs to tell them why they should care. And one of the things I see in presentations across all the magazine companies is they all do a really good job of teaching the client about the product itself, what the magazine does. What's often left out is why the customer should care about that. You know, most of these customers we're meeting with, they get up every day, they go to the office, they work all day, they come home, they collapse on the couch, they go to bed, the next day they do it all again. There is very little time to think about their business, and there is almost zero that actually have a strategy for growing their business. And one of the mistakes we make in the presentation is we will say something, but we won't connect the dots to their business. And so we assume they connect the dots. I'll give you a good example of that. Let's say I'm presenting to a mattress store. Let's say I'm doing a presentation to a mattress store. Now, I show them the map of just who's going to get my magazine. And I say, these are the homes that we're going to see your ad. Well, you're probably talking to a business that's never recognized that some customers are better than others. They just deal business with whoever comes in. So I'm looking at that, and you show them the map, and what do they see? They notice all these other people that don't get the magazine. And they wonder why. And in our mind, we're thinking, well, obviously, you know, we're going to nice homes, so you'll understand that's important. But do you think the average mattress store has ever made the connection that a 5-bedroom home needs a lot more mattresses than a 1-bedroom home? Do you think that's ever occurred to them? Do you think it's ever occurred to them that the guy in the trailer park is more likely to buy the $199 mattress that they make $10 off of, where the guy in the $1 million home is more likely to buy the $4,000 mattress that they make $2,500 off of? Maybe, but they haven't designed their marketing strategy around it. So you have to connect those dots to them so they understand not just what the magazine does, but why it's relevant to their business. And then you have to focus on solving their problem. Every person you ever meet has two things in their life. They've got problems they don't want, and they have results that they're not getting. Everybody has that. They've got problems they don't want and results they're not getting. You're walking in, your magazine solves those problems or focuses on getting them results they're not getting. And you have to connect those dots on a regular basis. Now the close. And during the close, everything has to screech to a halt. Because how many you all watched legal thrillers on TV? You know, they do in a trial, they present all this evidence, and then they get to the closing arguments. Now, in the closing arguments, you can't present new evidence. Why is that? That is because the closing arguments in a trial are all about clarifying what the customer already had, what the juror already knows, so that they can make a decision. And adding more information during that stage muddies the water. And the same thing applies to what you guys do. There should be no new information presented during the close, because the close serves a different purpose. It's all about making them comfortable saying yes. So you have to be highly empathetic. You've got to shift from this high energy to this high empathy, because you have to make them comfortable. The next thing you have to do is you have to find a working solution that they can be comfortable with. You have to find that right mix for them. And then you got to make them feel comfortable saying yes. You have to simplify the decision so much that they feel comfortable saying yes. And most times when I'm doing a run through with people, I don't get that. They leave it, they make it very high tension. Here's the reality that we all live in. Because we walk through life nearly on the verge of being paralyzed by fear, self doubt, indecision, overwhelm, if a decision is hard, we don't make it. It's not that we decide no, we just don't make it at all. And it's the same way with your customers. And that's why the close is so important. Now, how do we transition from high energy to empathy in a way that doesn't sound like locking up the brakes and being disruptive? Here's what I would suggest doing for this. At the end of your presentation, after you finish talking about the magazine, simply ask, if money wasn't an issue, would you want to be in the magazine? If money wasn't an issue, would you want to be in the magazine? Now, what does this do? It tells you whether you've sold them or not, whether they're interested in the magazine. You're basically asking them, hey, if I gave you a free ad, would you take it? What this will do, it does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it makes sure that the only objection remaining as you go forward is money. Because if there's another objection that doesn't involve money, it's going to come out here. Because if you know going into the presentation or into the close that whatever stops them from saying yes is money related, then you have control of the close instead of them. As long as there's something else left on the table, you don't. And so that is very important. Now, once you ask them that, 99 times out of 100, they're going to say yes. If they don't, you've got more work to go back and more information to provide them and other things. Now, some of you might be saying, well, it might not be money, it might be duration. It may be they're afraid of a long-term contract. That's about money. I guarantee you have never met with a client that would not sign instantly if you said, well, the only thing I offer is 100-year contract, but it's $1 a month, that they wouldn't sign on the spot. So duration is just a masked money objection. And so always remember that. Now, once you've established that question, then you want to move into the close. And here's how you do that. You simply say, well, my job now is to find a campaign that will grow your business at a price you're comfortable with. I mean, feel that energy change there. Feel how empathetic that sounds. One of the most powerful words you can use when closing a sale is comfortable. If I walk into any situation and someone tells me, well, first thing I'm going to do is I need to find you a comfortable place to sit, I automatically feel more comfortable. That word actually has the magical ability to take a lot of tension away. And this statement here automatically puts me in a better frame of mind to say yes as we move forward. My job now is to find a campaign that will grow your business at a price you're comfortable with. So let's now move on to the top 5 mistakes that we make. I want to start right now as we go through these, and I want to tell you that some of you, if you're not making any of these mistakes, you're making a lot of sales. And that's great. That's great. And I think you're still going to learn something from here. Maybe more of the why will come into play. But this is it. As we go through these, some of you are going to be making every one of these mistakes, and that's okay. I can tell you, I've mentioned before, I've done well over 100, maybe even closer to 150, 200 one-on-one presentations. And I'm going to say probably well over half the people I've done this with make all 5 of these mistakes. So don't wear any level of shame if you find yourself represented in these. Just know that they're costing you sales. So the first one, and these aren't in any particular order, they all will have the ability to destroy a sale. The number one is you're not asking for the sale. This one here, whenever I talk to anybody who tells me I've done 30, 40, 50 presentations without making a sale, I know without a fact that this is the mistake they're making. I know without a fact, without any question, that this is the mistake they're making. And it comes into play. Now, here's the thing. Every single one of them thought they were asking for the sale because they would get to the end of the presentation, they would show the options, and then they would say this, well, what do you think? Or, do you think this could help your business? That's not asking for the sale. That is not asking for the sale. That is asking to continue sitting around and chat. We will never voluntarily pull out our credit card unless the salesperson specifically says, are you ready to buy? And that is essential going forward, is to understand that you have to do that. The closing question has to sound like this in some form or another. Are you ready to move forward with this campaign right now or today? That it has to be in that form. And I can tell you, I can go through a conversation with every single person on this call and tell you in 30 seconds whether you're doing it or not. Because if I ask you, what is your closing question? And you say anything other than one sentence that's a question, then I know you're not asking for the sale. Because your closing question should be the same every single time, and it should flow naturally off your lips because it becomes incredibly well practiced. Mine was very simple. At this price, are you ready to get started with your campaign today so we can go ahead and be building out your ads? And it has to be. A closing question has a yes or no answer, and the yes involves moving forward now. So that's the first place people make mistakes. The second one is too many options. I have seen people get to the close and basically have 30 choices on the table. They can have eighth page, quarter page, half page, full page, 12, 24, 36 month duration, this digital, that digital, all kinds of stuff. And here's the reality. Every decision that someone has to make at once makes them less likely to make any decision. If I walk into a shoe store today and I need a pair of shoes, and that shoe store has one pair of shoes that fits me, it is going to take me 30 seconds to decide whether I'm going to buy a pair of shoes or not. If that shoe store has 70 pairs that fit me, I'm spending the next 4 hours trying on shoes, and the chances are I will still leave there without a pair. Because I will become so fixated on picking the wrong pair of shoes that I will never decide to buy a pair of shoes. And that's what happens with your clients. If you get to the end of the presentation and you're ready to ask for the sale, and they still have multiple options on the table, they will never buy. because at that point, their biggest fear will become picking the wrong option and not being in the magazine. And we've all seen this situation over and over again. And I guarantee you, give me a thumbs up in the comments if you've ever seen this situation where you get to the end of the presentation and somebody is absolutely giddy at the opportunity to be in your magazine. And maybe it's a package that involves writing some articles, and they are already mapping out what they're going to write about. And they're so excited about it, but they can't decide between the half page and the third page ad size. So they tell you, hey, call me tomorrow and I'll let you know which ad size I'm going to go with. And then you call them the next day and they don't answer the phone and they don't return your call. And you talk to them 3 days, 4 days, a week later, and they've just decided, well, it's just not in my budget right now. Or I just don't think it's the right fit for me. And when they left your presentation, you knew exactly that they were ready to go. They were ready to move. So what happened? What happened is they got so fixated on the half page versus the third page that they simply couldn't decide, so they didn't decide. And you lost the sale. In that situation, when you have that situation, you have to pick for them. And the best way to do that is simply say, hey, if that's what it's between, that tells me you like the half page size, but you like the third page price better. I'm not going to sell you the half page. I'm going to go ahead and take that off the table. I don't want you buying anything you're not comfortable with the price on. So let's take half page off right now. Let's go with the third page, and then down the road, once you're starting to see some momentum from your campaign, if we want to go bigger, we can. And what you did is you made that secondary decision for them, and you left room for them to move forward with the primary decision, which is to buy the third page, which they obviously were more comfortable with the price on. You left that on the table for them because you took the decision off. So what you have to do with your presentation is filter it down to one choice. Now, we'll talk about a second what happens when they say no, or I need to think about it for that one choice. We'll talk about that briefly. But if you ask for the sale with multiple choices still on the table, then they will never buy. The next mistake that happens is not being the expert. Now, what do I mean by that? I want you to take a moment and think about this scenario. You go home, you walk in your kitchen, and there's water gushing into the floor because there's a leak under your sink. You pull out your phone, you call a plumber. The plumber arrives as the water is rising in your kitchen floor. And he walks in and he says, you got a leak. And you're like, yeah. And he says, well, what would you like me to do? Would you like me to use a copper pipe or a PVC pipe? Or there's this new type of pipe that I sometimes put on. Do you want me to use that? And what type of fitting should I use? Should I use a plastic fitting or should I use an adhesive to fix this? Or if I use a plastic, then I have to have a special wrench. I'll have to go back to my truck and get. And he starts asking for you to tell him how he should fix your sink. And yet that's the way most of you do in your presentation. You present a bunch of options out there, and you're asking somebody that will admit they don't understand advertising and marketing to decide which one's best for their business. And what would you think about that plumber if he did that? Would you respect his knowledge as a plumber? Would you view him as an expert plumber? Of course not. Because he's asking you to tell him how to fix his sink. your top level publishers go in and say, hey, based on what you've told me about your business and where you are, I think this is the best option for you, and here's why. Now, that doesn't mean they will take that option. Just like that plumber, if he says, well, wait, I'm going to put a PVC pipe on there, and I'm the homeowner, and I know my entire house has copper plumbing, I have the right to say, well, if you don't mind, I'd rather you use copper. And he will put copper. That's it. That's the homeowner's option. But the plumber is expected to make recommendations. So are you, because you're the marketing expert in that conversation. And if all you're doing in your presentation and your close is throwing a bunch of options out there and asking somebody that doesn't understand advertising to sort through them and decide on their own what they need, nah, they're not going to do that. They're just not going to do it. Your best publishers establish, I understand everything. Just like if you're meeting with a financial advisor and he starts asking you what mutual fund he should recommend to his clients, your respect for that financial advisor is going to plummet because you expect him to be the expert in the room on financial advising. You are the expert in the room on advertising and marketing and what his business needs to do to grow. Own that. Own that. Now, next mistake. Avoiding the money conversation. There is no one in this webinar right now, not one single person that likes talking about money, that likes sharing their finances. Not one. Same way with the business owners you're with. No business owner says, man, I hope I get a chance to go over my company's finances, which represent my success and failures during this conversation. No one ever goes into a meeting thinking that. But if you don't talk about money, guess what's not going to happen? You're not going to make a sale. And here's where that question I mentioned earlier comes into play. If money wasn't an issue, would you want to be in the magazine? Because what you do by asking that question is you establish whatever they say later on is money related. So now, when someone says, I need to think about it, okay? Anybody ever heard anybody say that? You ever get that from a client? I need to think about it. If you ask the question earlier on, if money wasn't an issue, would you want to be in the magazine? And then you ask for the sale and they don't say yes, what do you know? You know they're not comfortable with that price. You know they're not, you know what they have to think about is they're not comfortable with that price, even if they love your magazine. Now, that doesn't mean they're blowing you off. What they very well might be thinking is, I need some time to figure out if I can make that work, or maybe if I give it a couple days, I'll win the lottery, or maybe a $1 million client will walk through the door between now and when he calls me back. They could be thinking all of those things. Meanwhile, what you're thinking is, well, if I call him back tomorrow and he says that price is too high, I could drop back from that half page to that quarter page. The only problem is that conversation where you drop back from the half page to the quarter page only happens if the money conversation takes place. And what you just did when you say, I'll call you back tomorrow, is you just turned over the keys to when that conversation takes place to a business owner that doesn't want to have that conversation. That's why you get ghosted when you call back. Because they look at your phone and say, ooh, that's John calling. if I answer the phone, I have to have an uncomfortable conversation about what my business can afford. I don't want to have that conversation. I'm just not going to answer because you turned over that conversation to the client. He doesn't want to have it, never takes place. So your plan to pull back to a smaller ad and a smaller campaign never gets implemented because you never get the chance. So what he'll do is he'll ghost you the first time, he'll ghost you the second time, he'll ghost you the third time, and then finally, if you're persistent, he'll finally answer and throw some bullshit answer out there why he's not going to be in the magazine that allows him to avoid having a money conversation with you. Well, I've decided it's not the right time. No, you didn't. You just didn't want to talk with me about what your company can afford. And understanding that that's what's taking place in the mind of the customer brings home why you have to initiate the money conversation during that first appointment. It's the only chance you're ever going to get. So how do you do that? They come back, you narrowed it down to one option. And you're like, okay, now here's, if you have the ability to add an extra discount at the end, this is how you use it. You've gone through, you've narrowed it down to one option. Let's say that option is $1,200. Okay, $1,200 a month. Hey, I can tell you, I really like this campaign. I think it's perfect for your business. It's $1,200 a month. But I tell you what, before we move forward, I have to say time is our most valuable commodity. Time, we can't replace time. I don't want this to go on and waste a bunch of your time and my time trying for us to get back together. So if we can go ahead and get this taken care of now and get started on your campaign, I'm willing to reduce that price a little bit more with a time saver discount that'll bring that from 1,200 down to 1,050. Are you more comfortable with 1,050 than you are with 1,200? Obviously, they're going to say yes and say, well, at 1,050, are you ready to get your campaign started today? And let's get moving. Now, at that point, they're either going to say yes or something else. And if they say something else, then you know it's about money. And that's when you simply come back and you say, hey, just a few minutes ago, you said if money wasn't an issue, you'd want to be in the magazine. Can I assume you're just not comfortable with that price? And guess what you just did? You just started a very comfortable money conversation. And here's the key. If you had said, think about how these two statements land from the client's perspective. Hey, can I assume that price is too high? From the client's perspective, that sounds like you're attacking his business. Can I assume you're just such a lousy business owner that you can't pay that price? That's the way he hears that. On the other hand, if I say, hey, can I assume that you're just not comfortable with that price? That's an elevating question. That basically says, hey, I respect your ability as a business owner, and you know what your comfort level is involving risk and expense. So can I assume that this just doesn't meet that threshold you've established? And they're going to say yes. And then as soon as they say they're not comfortable with that price, you take that offer off the table. You take it off the table. Because remember, you told them you're trying to find a package that they're comfortable with that'll help them grow their business. You take it off the table and you say, hey, okay, well, then let's back up a step. Are we in the ballpark? Are we in the parking lot? Or are we way out in outer space? And asking that question, they're either going to say, if you're in the parking lot, Then you come back and you may adjust some digital, or you might adjust this ad side down or something that drops the price from 1050 down to 950. And you say, well, here, if we do this, we can get it to 950. And here's what you'll get. Are you more comfortable with 950 for this than you were with 1050? And they're going to say yes. Then you ask for the sale again. If they come back and say we're in the parking lot, you drop your ad size down a couple places, make some adjustments, and bring it in at the lower 600 price. If they say you're out in outer space, you drop it back to the lowest package you can put on the table, and you ask again. And you make those adjustments because now you're having the money conversation, trying to find something they're comfortable with. And this has the added effect of establishing you as somebody that's trying to work with them to find something that will grow their business at a price they're comfortable with. You are better off leaving there with a signed contract for the smallest campaign you can possibly sell than you are with the back cover if you call them back tomorrow. And that's where you have to understand that process. And you have to have that conversation while you're sitting with them, because if you wait for them to say, let's have that conversation now, it ain't going to happen. And then finally, the last of the mistakes is freezing when they push back. Freezing when they push back. Handling the objection. And this is where most people freeze, because this is that point where not having a complete understanding of all the ways you can help their magazine, or you can help them with your magazine, kind of often causes you to freeze. Ironically, this is the same reason many of you struggle picking up the phone and making phone calls, because you're scared of what happens next if they push back, because you don't have the language to prepare for it, and you don't have the understanding, and you're just not ready for every possible scenario. And so you freeze. And handling that is in there. So that's where all of those steps coming in, having that money conversation is all about that, recognizing what is a real objection and what is a faux objection that they're just throwing out there to avoid having to make a decision. And you got to have the framework and the understanding to push back. Because, and I can tell you this right now, because I have absolutely zero doubt that for every business I set in front of, their best tool for reaching the folks in my community is the magazine I'm presenting to them. And I have zero doubt that in a regional community, the customers that I reach are who they need to reach, that are concentrated together. There is never a reason not to push back, not to handle it. And here's where this comes in. And one of the things that I teach people when I work with people on how to handle an objection is a very simple understanding and a recognition of what happens if you don't push back, if you don't respond. Here's what happens. Nothing happens. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's put this in perspective when you're making your phone calls. What happens if you're making a phone call and someone says, send me an email? Or someone says, hey, can you, advertising doesn't work for me. Or somebody says, print is dead. What happens if you don't respond to that and keep pushing forward? Nothing. Guess what's going to happen if you do and say the wrong thing? Nothing. So you have nothing to lose by responding. Same thing happens when you're doing your close and somebody has an objection. If I were to poll everybody on this conversation and ask you collectively, how many times when you've been meeting with a service industry person and you've gotten to the end of the presentation and they really liked what you were doing and they uttered these words, I need to talk to my wife, or I need to talk to my husband. How many times has that happened? And how many times have they ever bought? The reality is, collectively across all of you on this call, you have probably had that said to you at the end of the presentation 200 times. And I would be stunned if any of you can tally up more than one or two that ended up buying. So the reality is, and you all know that, every one of you, whether you realize it or not, when somebody says, I need to talk to my wife, your body language shrinks because you know exactly how that's going to end. Because here's what has to happen for that to end in a sale. The person you're meeting with has to have a photographic memory that enables them to remember all of the details you talked about that establish the value of your magazine. They have to go home that night, sit down at the dinner table after the kids have gone to bed and no suppers being cooked or anything like that, pull out their notes and actually have this extensive conversation with their spouse that outlines exactly all of the value that your magazine brings to the table. And then once establishing the value, they have to mention the price. And then the wife or husband has to say, yes, that makes sense. Tell them yes. Now, in how many situations is that going to happen? None. Really and truly, the best you could actually hope for is, hey, honey, I met with this magazine publisher today that's got this ad campaign they want me to buy. It's going to be $1,500. What do you think? That's really the best conversation you could possibly realistically hope for. And that is never going to result in a yes. What is more likely going to happen is, because that business owner knows what their spouse is going to say, they're going to chicken out. They're going to get home and their spouse is going to be talking about the rough day they have. And they're going to say, well, now's not the time to bring it up. And they're going to never bring it up. That conversation is not going to take place in any way, shape, or form. 3 or 4 days later, they're going to throw their spouse under the bus and tell you, well, he said no. And that's what's going to happen. So when someone says, I need to talk to my wife, at that moment, you could walk around their desk, kick them in the groin, and you don't hurt your chance of closing a sale at all. Your chances of making the sale before kicking him in the groin was 0. Your chances of making the sale after kicking them in the groin was 0. You just feel better about it. So what my point of this is, I'm not encouraging you to kick them in the groin. What I'm pointing out is nothing you say at that point lessens your chance of closing the sale. So why not articulate a response to them that actually does move a sale closer, or at the very least educates them about their business? The reality is, 8 times out of 10, they don't need to talk to their spouse. That's just their delay tactic. That's what they do to avoid having to make a decision and to villainize someone else if that decision ends up being no. So So you have to recognize that. And in order to know what the scenario is, to know if it really is one of those times when you need to handle that situation and push forward. Now, here's the reality. There are ways to handle every situation when you understand two things. When you understand completely all of the ways your magazine can help that business, which is something almost no one does. One of the big things that comes into play in advertising and marketing is not only the fact that the customers don't understand it completely, most people selling it don't understand it either. I could list you right off the top of my head 10 ways and 10 reasons why that customer needs to be in your magazine that has not a single thing to do with ever getting a new customer that would benefit their business, whether they ever get a new customer or not. And most salespeople never understand that. Most customers think that you advertise just to get leads and that a good ad campaign is going to act like a zombie virus that makes that customer who sees that ad campaign walk into your business. I must buy your product. Oh, by the way, I saw it in the magazine. That's what they're looking for, and that's not realistic. That's not the way advertising works, and that's not where your power is. And so you need to understand that in order to properly handle it. Now, I do want to mention real quickly, hopefully I've given you some things you've worked with. I hope there aren't anybody that makes all 5 of these mistakes, but I'm guessing there are. I'm going to open it up here to questions in just a second. I'll be glad to stay on here as long as you guys have questions. I'll be glad to address anything you've got. But I do want to mention real quickly, basically, I do have a course that is designed specifically for local magazine publishers to fully understand their product and how to handle any objections. I've developed a framework for handling objections specifically for publishers that will work in any situation. Basically, in this course, we're gonna understand what's really happening in the minds of the customer when they push back and the reasons that they don't buy. You would be amazed at how many people you want to be in your magazine who simply talk themselves out of it because of the reasons we just discussed and their own insecurities. And that comes into play. I want to teach, we're going to talk about, stop selling customers and start selling profit. Most business owners have lost sight of the fact that their ultimate goal for growth is more profit and not more customers. It's wild. If I go back to when I first started in 2015 with my first magazine, and I looked at all of the businesses who told me they don't need to advertise because they've got all the customers they can handle, not a single one of those businesses exists today. They're all gone. And if they had all the customers they needed, why are they gone? It's because their model was based around volume of customers, which increases overhead costs and doesn't focus on profit. Your magazine and the surrounding products is designed to focus on profit. And then ultimately, by having these understandings, you can respond clearly and confidently with no hesitation and able to handle those objections both on the phone. And what you're going to find is you're going to find that it's easier to pick up the phone and make calls because you'll start to view that process as every call I make is my chance to help that customer rather than every call I make is my chance to try to sell my product. Because once you understand that, and I go back to where I started, every call you make allows you to possibly be that 5-minute conversation that changes the course of that business, like that conversation in a bar did with my mom and dad 30 years ago. And so anyway, that's where we are. If you have any questions, if you're interested, all you have to do to sign up for the course is go to jpbusinessacademy.com, mastering objections. One sale covers the cost. The cost $500, does come back with a 21-day guarantee. If you've completed all 15 lessons and you can honestly tell me that there's nothing there that will help you make a sale or move forward, then I'll give you your money back. In addition to that, if you purchase the course and ever encounter an objection that you are not sure how my framework applies to, reach back out and I'll either call and we'll address it personally, or I'll create a special workshop and add to the course to address that particular objection. And you'll have lifetime access. So this is something that from now on, whenever you come into play, it also comes with a handout that you can put in a notebook and take with you and go over before you walk into an assignment or an appointment. And then also it has flashcards where you can legitimately practice how to apply the framework to your business. Okay, I know that's a lot. I'm sure many of you are brain fried right now. Some of you might have obvious questions. I'm going to look at the chat. I haven't had a chance to check the chat the whole time we've been going. Let's see. A couple people have left. Okay, so we're good. Anybody have any questions you want to throw on the table? Any particular struggles you're facing that you want to deal with? Want to throw out there? Anything's on the table.
Hey, John, this is Marcel.
Hey, Marcel.
Lately, I've been getting people saying, give me a guarantee it will work because
Okay.
I've done this before. I've used digital marketing companies. I've used blah, 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 magazines. You know, they say, show me a guarantee that it will work. And
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I've spent too much money doing that.
Here's an interesting, and that is something that comes up very, very often, Marcel. So let's kind of look at that real quickly. It is essential. Here's something very fascinating. That is a relatively new concept in the form of business. And it's really happened in the last 25 years or so. If you go back to the year 2000, in the year 2000, 10% of the small businesses that were in the country failed every year. And it had been 10% for almost all of history. I mean, go back to ancient Egypt, and it probably was 10% of the businesses failed, a bunch of others started up. And then along came digital marketing. Now, digital marketing is incredibly powerful, and I don't want to undermine that at all, but it serves a different purpose than the print does. The print marketing is all about reaching and building that brand and creating a reason for people to choose you. The digital landscape changed everything because that was also about the same time that this massive push for coupons started to come on. And what the coupon does and what the digital price driven ad does is it allows the customer to connect actual customers to ad campaigns. If I'm running a coupon, if I'm running a digital discount, if I've got a QR code that says go here for 20% off, I am able to attach a customer to a campaign. That never existed in the form it is today prior to that shift. And what happens is when you've got a situation where you're being asked to make a decision about something you don't understand, you are looking for ways to validate your decision. And so it's very important. That's what they're looking for. They're wanting some way to say, if I make this decision, then I will have proof I made the right decision. That is just pie in the sky fantasy. Because here's the reality. I'm going to share a story with you guys real quickly. And I want you to think about this. And it's going to be a little long-winded. And I apologize, but I'll get around to the point here, Marcel, when you look at it. Is, let's say, and I've got one here in town that I use as an example for this, that does this. let's say you own a um, a carpet store, okay? And you are one of those business owners, like you're describing, that wants to be able to track the results of their campaign. And so your chosen method of advertising is 4 times a year to do a great big sale. So every Memorial Day, every 4th of July, every Labor Day, and every Thanksgiving, you decide to do a massive 20% off store-wide sale. We all know businesses like that. And so leading up to Memorial Day, you're advertising, you're running billboards, you're running TV ads, you're running radio spots, you're running print ads promoting on Memorial Day, come by 20% off store wide. And so Memorial Day comes along and you pull in the parking lot an hour before you're scheduled to open, and there's already a handful of cars waiting. And you're like thinking, oh my God, this is awesome. You look up at like 10:30, and every one of your sales staff is meeting with somebody, and you're high-fiving your sales manager. You're going back in your office and just celebrating how wise you are to have made this great marketing move. And then at the end of the day, you sold 50 carpet installs. And you've got to even hire some contract labor to execute all of those because you had such a great day. And so you call your wife, you're going out for steak dinner, you're celebrating what a great, wise business person you were for having this great sale. And then now let's take a step back from that. What did that campaign really tell the community? That campaign really told the community that if you take 20% off of my normal prices, I have the cheapest carpet in town. That's the message that you really sent to the community. So is that campaign going to attract people who want good carpet, or is it going to attract people who want cheap carpet? It's going to attract people who want cheap carpet. So of those 50 installs you signed, 47 of them were for your cheapest carpet that you sell. Now, your cheapest carpet also has the lowest margin. And maybe your cheapest carpet only has a 13% margin and you gave a 20% discount. So at the end of the day, you lost 7%. Now, most business owners would never take any time at all to evaluate that. They would just celebrate. And they would notice come tax time how much money they lost. But the ones that did would justify it, say, that's okay. We took a hit, but those guys got to see how great our service is. So the next time they need carpet, they'll know where to come. No, they won't, because that's not how they make their decisions. They make their decisions off who sells the cheapest. So you have to make sure you're going to be the cheapest the next time they need carpet. Now, all of that can be quantified. What can't be quantified is the guy across the street that lives in the $1 million home that he needs carpet, and he won't go to your store. He won't step foot in there because in his eyes, you're the Big Lots of carpet stores. You're the Dollar Tree of carpet stores, because the only time he sees your message is when you've got these big sales. And so in his mind, all you sell is the cheap shit. So he goes and buys his carpet from somebody else. And so at the end of the year, you think you've had the greatest year of your career because you sold so much carpet, and yet when you do your taxes, you lost 300 grand. And you wonder how that happens because you had to hire more people for all these installs. And 5 years later, you're not in business. And that exact situation's taking place here in Danville. I got one carpet store that you go out to their carpet store. They now have a mattress store attached to it. They have a gun range and they have a gun store. And it's all because they're not making enough profit on any of them to live on. Meanwhile, their competitor who sells the exact same carpet and focuses on his brand and building his reputation on quality has opened up 4 new locations in the last 5 years. And so it's understanding that. Now telling all of that to you, Marcel, because not that you need to explain that to the customer, but that's the reality. So that customer is wanting to basically make a risk-free marketing decision, which doesn't exist. And being honest with them about that is really key in having that conversation. And one of the best ways of doing that and making a point is I am a big fan of narratives. Stories break through when facts don't because people process them differently. One of the things I always like to point out, and I'm in this situation, is to look around the room. And if you look around the room, you're going to see an IBM PC. You're going to see a Diet Pepsi can. You're going to see an Epson printer. You're going to see all of these branded items. And I always just like to say, hey, I wish that's how it worked. I wish that's how it worked. But the reality is the only way you can get that kind of direct response, which is what you're looking for, is to give away your profit and offer discounts. The reality of it is your best customers are going to make their buying decisions differently. I look around this office, I see a Diet Pepsi, I see an Epson printer, I see an IBM computer. Can you tell me which campaign you saw, which Pepsi commercial you saw that led you to make that purchase? Can you tell me what Epson printer company ad you saw that led you to buy that Epson? That's the way real businesses do. Now, here's the reality. Your large corporations understand that. That's why now they try sometimes, occasionally they'll go for discount coupons online and stuff like that, but it's about inventory control as much as anything. They've produced more computers than they can sell right now, so they step back and will go after some quick sales through that means. But their real thing, their constant core foundation is establishing brand and emotional connections. And so understanding that here's the only real way, folks, that a business owner can quantify the results of his campaign in your magazine is he needs to be able to know what his current market share is in your home neighborhoods. He needs to measure that market share, and then he needs to run the campaign, and then after a year go back and measure that market share again and see if it increased. The reality of it is most business owners have no idea what their market share is in your neighborhoods or in anywhere else for that matter. And so that's where that breaks down. All of those major companies I have, they've got marketing departments that do exactly that. They know what their market share is in demographics, 25 to 34, working middle class. They know what their market share is. They devise a campaign that targets that group. Then they come back after executing that campaign and look at that market share again. And if it went up, they said, hey, that campaign's working, we'll stick with it. If it didn't, they try something else. That's the way educated advertisers move forward. They have a strategy. What your guys are looking for is they're looking for a way to move their business forward without taking risks. And while every business owner on the planet wishes that was the case, that is not the case. The second thing I want all of you guys to understand what it means for your campaign to work. You'll hear this a lot. I want to know how this works. Well, in the customer's mind, what they want that word to mean is I run this ad, my business grows. So if I run this ad, my business will grow. That's what they define by working. But the reality is, work on your part doesn't mean that. Because in order for their business to grow, there is 1,000 factors that are going to determine that. Do they provide good service? Do they answer their phone? Do they show up when they say they're going to? Do they provide a good product? All of those things play into whether or not their business is grown. All you have control of is their messaging. And all of those other things don't work if they don't have the right messaging. So, as a publisher, the one and only thing that you have the ability to do is to put their message in front of the customers they need to reach in the most effective way. And you can guarantee any person you're setting across that your campaign's going to work because that's what it's going to do. And that is one thing you can say to the client. Hey, I'm not really sure what you mean when you ask me if this is going to work, because I know it will work, but I think the way I understand work and what you understand work may mean two separate things. I think what you're asking me is, will your business grow if you buy this campaign? And I can't promise that, because whether or not your business grows depends on a lot of factors, including, do you answer the phone? Do you provide good work? Do you show up when you say you're going to? All of those things. I assume you do all of those things. All I can control is I can put your message in front of these high-end homeowners, which are very profitable customers and base their decisions on emotional connections and quality. I can put your message in front of these customers month after month after month. What happens with that message is entirely out of my control. So I can promise you the part of growing your business that I am involved with will work. I will put your message in front of these people month after month after month, and these are the people that you need to reach. But you need to understand, no marketing campaign can control what happens to that message after it gets there. And sometimes you'll be surprised how many people appreciate that level of honesty.